Well, what's going on? Crystal, Ramon, Vernon. Can I call you Vernon?
No, do not.
Why do people call you Vernon?
Well, that's
Because they cannot read.
they cannot read. Thank you. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine. Like, there's a lot of ways you can mispronounce my name, but that's just,
Vernon is not one of them.
that's just laziness.
You don't like that.
I do not.
All right. I'm gonna call you Ramon.
I appreciate that.
Your mama named you Ramon. I'm gonna call you Ramon.
Ramon.
And we got James in the building.
What up, though?
And it's the Preaching Collective. What up, y'all?
What up, cuz?
Hello.
Well, last couple episodes, we're in the book
Previously on the Preaching Collective.
That's why I used to. My grandma used to watch. Remember those what they call it, stories or the soap operas? Remember those things? And that's how they used to start off. Previously on. Was it? I think it was called. One of them was called The Day and the Night. The Day and the Night or something like that.
Days of Our Lives.
Days of Our Lives. Yeah. There we go.
The Young and the Restless.
So yeah, you had to take those naps too. You know what it is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I remember those.
Plenty of time being babysit by my grandmother.
Yep.
And they were on, and
It was plenty of time when I wasn't able to watch TV because grandma was watching
That's right.
her soaps. I was like, man,
This is whack. So
yeah. But previously on Esther.
Previously on the Preaching Collective, we talked about chapter 3 and Haman and this guy who is this evil guy, and he wanted to annihilate the whole entire Jewish people because Mordecai would not bow down to him. It seems like there's some historical background if you look at 1 Samuel 15 between the Jewish people and the Amalekites. So it seemed like there's probably some historical tension going on. Maybe that plays into why as well. Maybe Mordecai didn't want to bow down. Also, maybe why Haman was like, we got to get these people out of here. So that's just very interesting. But then we talked about this idea of systemic injustice and how things can be written into, an edict or an executive order into law, and how somebody like Haman, who's second in command, can talk to the king and be able to try to, eliminate all these people, a certain people group. And we talked about, man, who are the Hamans of our day in some ways, or who are the Hamans historically, if you want to look at it that way. Now we shift over to this idea of, in chapter 4, Esther comes in. And it's very interesting because this is where Esther kind of agrees to help the Jewish people.
Don't give it all to him up front.
I know, right?
She does. But Mordecai, the text is pretty interesting here, where it talks about how he is like in lament mode.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting,
Oh my
actually.
gosh, me too.
Like if you take, he makes a stand to not bow down before someone who for whatever reason is not worthy of it, right, in his eyes. And then the response from that becomes this sort of systemic, like it's almost like it's a future systemic, because they set a date to do it. Right, so it hadn't actually happened yet. But there's a situation in which I thought was important to when we talked about last time about systemic issues. It's like, sometimes people think about the system and don't think about, like, actually it's people who create those systems and create the processes that then get carried out by all the men and women who delivered those messages, and then everybody who read those messages and was probably preparing to gear up and just start chopping heads off, right? Whenever it came time. And again, it was women, it was children, didn't matter. If they were Jewish, take them out. And so Mordecai learns of that. And then I wonder, how much he felt responsible for it. Like, I wonder if he thought to himself, man, what if I just bowed down and I wouldn't have put my people at risk?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Thinking about it from that emotional, I put myself in Mordecai's shoes. He's just like, I can't. I'm undone. What have I done? Right? I just... Just that part, and it's in there.
Yeah.
Can I also add, I thought it was refreshing to see a male lamenting like that, because we always hear in the Bible of the wailing women, and just the progression that he had when he, it said he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, ashes, then went out into the midst of the city, wailed loudly and bitterly. It's like this progression of this man mourning and really grieving what is to come for his people. And normally you see women who do that, Jeremiah says, call for the wailing women when something like when our people are in distress or when they're facing these hard times. So I thought that was refreshing to see a man do that. But then also, I mean, I didn't even think of it that way as far as was there a bit of guilt that he carried. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting here too is I just thought of this as it mentions, his lament and which the lament of all the Jews, right? Everywhere they go, there's fasting, weeping, lamenting. Esther's young woman and eunuchs come and tell Esther she's distressed. Calls, has her officials bring Mordecai to her to find out what this was and why it was, which tells you, I mean, that means it's interesting. Here's the lament, the pain of a people group. I mean, at this point, Esther is part of the elite, right? She's part of the kingdom, the system.
Talk about
and
it.
it's interesting.
So
It was like she didn't know.
Nope.
I had no
Right?
idea.
Here is something which is, there's a lot to say here on this. Something that's affecting a minority group, right, in a population, and how easy it is for the majority or for those in power to not be aware at all of it.
Those in
Yeah.
priv-
Something that's really tragic.
and those in
horrible.
privilege.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so Esther, like she didn't know, right?
Yeah.
And here's something that's really pretty huge that's going to happen to the Jews. But at this point, like she's being treated not as a Jew. She's the queen.
Yep.
You should say that again. She's being treated as what?
Not as a Jew anymore, right?
Right.
She's a queen. She's passed, right? And so,
Wow.
so Mordecai has to come and explain to her sort of what happened, right?
And not just that.
And it-
Not even just that. What do you guys
No, go ahead.
the fact that when she's there and then she goes and sends her eunuch, the back and forth between her and Mordecai
Yeah.
is that interesting to where
So interesting.
there's a degree where it's like, since she's now being treated not as a Jew, and then she finds out what the problem is, Mordecai goes, hey, you need to help us.
Verse 14.
Right. And then,
For if you keep silent
Oh.
at this time.
wait, not even before then, before that. Because he says that after she responds to him. So the first thing is like Mordecai kind of sends with the eunuch to explain what happened and how it happened and gave her the edict and said, hey, this is what's gone out all across the region, right? And then she responds back. And in that, I think he's like, hey, you have to go. You got to go. You got to help us. You're there.
It's almost like go ahead.
But she responds to that and it's like, yeah, but there's this law in place.
Yeah. Nothing I can really do about it, kind of.
It's like,
You know what I'm saying?
I can't, my hands are tied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost. And then Mordecai has to remind her. And then that's where I think
For you,
it's
you
like,
keep silent. Yeah. Which says a lot.
Well, I think that's the most known verse in Esther here, verse 14, right? If you keep silent, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this.
Such a time as this.
I mean, you almost have to always mention this verse, I think, in that this is the clearest sort of hint of awareness that there's the fingerprints of God, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like it's although it makes me ask, why? Yeah, I mean, here's the best time to say, and here God will deliver us, but it's very subtle. Relief and deliverance will come from another place. Which place, right? And maybe you've been put here for such a time as this, right? Like who's put you there?
But listening to that, he still has this hope, and he still has this hopeful aspect. It was like, if it ain't gonna be you,
Right.
It's
It's
coming
gonna
from
happen.
God gonna make a way.
I know
He's gonna
that.
make a way out of no way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
in the midst of his sackcloth and ashes, like
He doesn't say God, though.
lamentation.
I'm just curious. There's no way
He
to
just
answer
says
that.
deliverance.
fair enough, because God is not mentioned in the book.
Yeah,
That's very fair.
It makes me wonder if they follow the lore, but it's not as vibrant as it used to be. So they're more vague about it. I don't know. It's just it's interesting thing to think about. Obviously, looking at it macro wise, that's we want to say what we've been saying.
Yeah.
But that's a strong thing to say. Liberation and protection. I'm reading the net, so if it looks a little different, but liberation and protection for the Jews will appear from another place. It's coming.
Yeah.
And I think there's, even when we talk about remember Rhythms of Faith, the lessons from Negro spirituals, in the midst of like pain, sorrow, lamentation, he still goes, deliverance is still going to come.
Yeah.
Right. But this is still a moment where we need to
Maybe it's a sense
feel
that
this.
maybe he's drawing from their tradition, right? That Jews have been delivered, and obviously it's Yahweh who always sort of steps in to do that.
Right.
The silence part, that's the part out of all this stuff that is really striking me right now, because I think that when we have injustices that happen, laws that has happened, Esther, like you said, she's a queen. You know, she's a person in power. She's a person of privilege.
There's no reason to put that at risk.
There's no everything is good for her, and you know, relative. You know, from that perspective, in comparison to the Jews. And I know she is a Jew, but it's just like it's interesting. Like Dr. King says something about he has a quote about the silence of our friends. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, this idea of Mordecai saying like, yo, if you keep silent, like he's saying like silence is not the answer. You need to go do something about this.
Martin Luther King said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends.
So based upon that, man, I wonder like let's just say Esther was silent and continued to be silent throughout the whole entire thing. What will we would remember how we wouldn't remember her in this light that we remember her now.
Yeah. And I'll say this too, because reading this again, I mean, first of all, this is really good. I'm so glad. I was like, I hope I'm not going to play the devil's advocate, because as I was reading this, like, you see my Bible, I wrote like fearful. She was oblivious. She was completely detached, everything that you talked about. And I'm like, she was not an advocate. Like in the context of this, where she had to, you know, go and tell her, like her uncle or her cousin had to literally like tell her what's going on. Like, you have no idea what's going on. And then on top of that, for him to actually threaten you, then you act. So it's like, you see, like she was silenced. Like she didn't want to do it. Yeah. She was
There's an admonishment
fearful.
from him. Like he's sort of rebuking her a little bit.
Yeah.
I think.
And
like, don't assume like you're gonna escape just because you're there.
Which
like,
she responds to it, which is good.
Yeah. But even when when he was lamenting, like she didn't ask like what was going on. She was just like, yo, put on clothes, because you don't do that in front of a king. Like it's almost like she's fearful, like, yo, let's not
call that out.
You know what I'm saying? Like she was fearful.
Well, she's fully assimilated into like the Persian.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, again, I think the Bible gives us the details it's supposed to. You know, we normally, Esther is seen as a heroic figure, but there's more going on there. I mean, I think we could, the trajectory of her, you know, what it took for her to get here, what she had to sacrifice, right, and everything else, and that this is just, you know, we're moving on up, right? We made it, and we're here, and and I think that's a good point too there, Crystal. I mean, just her immediate reaction to lament and pain and sorrow is like, you need to come on, put some good clothes on, right?
Right.
Yeah. And, you know,
don't rock the boat.
Yeah. And I'm, you know, good for Mordecai to not sort of be like, okay, you know, I mean, Mordecai could have been like, yeah, you know what, I'm related to you. Yeah. So just make sure I'm covered.
Yeah.
But his solidarity with his people, and then his willingness to challenge her, to say, you know what, like you can't be silent on this.
Absolutely. Okay, I was just going to say, just in that context, because as I was reading this, I thought about Malala. Is that how you say her name? The young girl who actually stood up for her. She clearly she clearly made a stand and was shot. And so you see, like this is not Esther's initial response. She didn't have that bravery, if you will. Wow. It was almost like, yo, no, you need to do this, because
it took some prompting.
Exactly. Yeah. So.
Which, you know, I think, you know, it reminds us that we do need to challenge one another at times to not be silent, to not be passive, to not be consumerist, to not sort of be comfortable. Yeah. And the need for that. And then, you know, and hopefully we have the ears to hear it. It took a little bit for Esther, but her willingness to say, well, if I perish, I perish. Yeah. The recognition that, like, you know what, like I need to be willing to sacrifice this to help this minority group, really, is what it came down to.
The idea of, I meant to say this as well from a couple times, but I actually talked to a Jewish rabbi about the story of Esther in the Old Testament. Very, very fascinating conversation I was able to have with him. But it was funny. I sat in his office, and first of all, this dude, he's super cool, man. Like he's super chill. You got the there's a difference between Orthodox Jews and Reformed Jews. Yeah. And he's breaking down, he was talking, and he was just like, so what brings you in my office today? What do you want? What do you want to talk about?
Hilarious.
What do you want to talk about? And I was like, well, Book of Esther, this, that, and the fourth. And he goes, huh, okay. he goes, well, what do you think about the Book of Esther? Let's start there.
That's funny.
And I told him, like, yeah, basically what we've been talking about in the Preaching Collective.
You should have told him, like,
I did say this.
subscribe.
I did say this.
YouTube.com/Roosevelt Community Church.
I did say this.
Leave a comment.
I said in a nutshell, I think, the idea of how God is active even when we don't directly see it. And he starts smiling ear to ear, and he goes, but God is not mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
So how do you get God out of it? Then I broke down the idea of, like, sure, but when you look at the story of Esther, there's so many quote unquote coincidences that I cannot chalk it. The only thing I can chalk it up to was the providence of God.
Right.
Yeah.
And he said, I like that. And I was like,
Nothing more.
I was like, okay, cool. I was like, all right, bet. But then he says, well, from mainly a Jewish idea of Esther, he did say, and it was fun. He goes, most, Jews, rabbis think that the Book of Esther is a joke.
Wow.
He says it's a joke. It's shady. He said that it's a parody. Like, it's a parody of some sort. And he also said that there's themes in it that we can definitely resonate with, but we don't, like, a lot of us don't really take it serious.
Wow.
He said us.
A lot of rabbis don't take it serious
Interesting.
because it's a joke. It's
So there is shadiness in the book.
So they see it as
So I thought it was interesting that he came
They see
out
it
and
as
said
comedy.
that.
Hold on.
It's a parody. It's a, you know what I mean? If it's a parody.
Interesting.
It's a the way that the weight. Here we go. The weight that they would put on some, not all, but some. I want to be very careful. Some rabbis, the weight that they would put on a book like Genesis or a book like Deuteronomy, they don't put the same weight on Esther. They just don't. They just.
I mean, I would argue we don't either. So
it wasn't. It was one of the books that wasn't found at the Dead Sea Scrolls. They you know what I mean?
they're just like, whatever.
So I thought that was very, very interesting. But he did say that there are a big major themes in it that they do resonate with. And,
Interesting.
Every year they'll read it for the festival of Purim. And every time Haman's name is mentioned, they'll boo and stuff like that.
That's funny.
He did say that this festival as well is basically the equivalent to a Halloween mixed with Mardi Gras. It's kind of that idea. So for a lot of people, it's a time to get drunk.
I would love to understand the parody, like how they see the characters and the character development and the interaction between them, like the story arc. I'd be really interested to hear that. I've got a buddy of mine who's a rabbi, Troy Wallace, and so I should text him and be like, yo, man, let's chat about this.
Yeah,
because I'd even be interested in how, like, what the Hebraic name, what Esther's Hebrew name is, like how they refer to it. So like when they're talking about God, they say Hashem, like the name, because you don't use God's proper name, so they'll say Hashem. And so in the same sense, I go, is there a name that they use when they're referring to Esther? So like Moses is Moshe or something like that. And so that's a really interesting idea.
Well, that's like the Hebrew way of pronouncing it is what you're getting at.
Right. So I'm
like Egypt is Misraim, right? It's
right.
not even
so like, what did they say? Like what I would love to hear how they use the language around Esther, and then especially if it's
what the Hebrew name of Esther is.
Yeah, because when you start thinking parody and all the like the sort of imagery that the Hebrew language and then therefore the story. Like, I wonder what all those parallels.
One thing he did show me that I thought was super dope was he showed me a huge scroll of Esther, and he showed me the exact scroll that he reads
nice.
every year, and I did not get a picture of it. I was like,
what was I thinking?
But But anyways, it was fascinating just talking to him about that. But Esther's response, if I perish, I perish. Yeah. We talked about this a little bit before we started. The idea of, is Esther some sort of type of Christ or a foreshadowing of Christ in some form or fashion, specifically with her being willing to sacrifice, which I think is one of the themes here, willing to sacrifice herself after some prompting and pep talk from Mordecai. Where she was able to, if I perish, I perish. If I die, I die.
Yeah. Do people know why she would have said that? Just in context in regards to like what the actual law was.
Well, going before a king without being summoned, that was death. Like, you don't just approach the king.
Like, it was legislation. Like,
yeah,
if you go in there and the king doesn't summon you.
According to Persian law, you don't just go and just how you just bust up in my office all the time. Back in the day.
Hey.
Back in the day, you just can't do that. You know what I'm saying?
It gives you a sense of the difference between the two. Just in case you ain't know.
So yeah, I mean, she's like, yo. So yeah, you can't really do that back in the day because the king has the authority to kill you.
Well, it was death by default unless the king intervened and said, no, don't. They can come in.
Yeah, he does have veto power, if you will, to be able to say.
But the default is like they could just chop your head off if you walk in, unless he goes, hey, here, you can come in.
I was gonna say I like that you mentioned that part. I mean, because she did get there. However, way she was prompted, but then also she says, like, she calls for her people to fast, do not drink or for 3 days. Like, so it's almost like there's still kind of like this underlying of fear, like, oh my gosh, because when our back is against the wall, we will turn down the plate, we will not drink, we will fast because we really need God to hear. So it's still kind of like, okay, she's doing it, but still there's still a level of like
angst,
behind it. But still, she does it. So I think it's great.
Which I feel like there's a level of like humanness to Esther. I love when you read stories and you realize like, Esther eventually, just like anybody, like anyone has the capacity to, in a moment, do a thing that's really, really significant. But I don't think that necessarily means that person needs to be turned into a certain kind of, icon, instead of realizing like, hey, we all have the propensity to be scared of a legitimate law. We all, like, if we get into a place of position or power or privilege, that does something to us, and sometimes therefore we do need to be reminded and say, hey, don't think that you're just there, just like, no,
don't forget who you are. Don't forget where you came from.
Yeah.
And you're not there for no reason, right? It's often a case that we talk about people who have power or privilege, and it's like, there's no need to be guilty because you have power or privilege or anything. It's what you do with it, especially when people are calling you to something. Yo, people are in pain. Yo, something's about to happen out here, and you're like, man, well, I don't know what I can do because there's this law in place. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
I mean, going back to Esther being a type of Christ. I mean, Jesus prays in the garden, right? Very true. May this cup pass from me, but not my will, but your will be done, right? And I don't take that as Jesus saying like, I don't want to do this. It's just like, if there's another way to get this done, that doesn't require, me being separated from the Father on the cross and all that he's going to go through, help me in this moment. I think, the text shows angels come and help him, but like his real angst, right? And of what he's about to go through, but his willingness to do it. According to the will of the Father, to save a people unto himself. And so in similar way with Esther, I think there's some parallels with that, I think.
For sure.
Her desire for prayer and fasting, even as she then is willing to step into the gap on behalf of her people. To really, and in many ways too, she's going to, this is looking ahead, she's going to firmly identify herself with her people in the chapters to come, right? And so so this is the first step of her putting herself at risk, if we can think about it.
Right.
And it's sort of, I think it fits very well. You said this before, we don't normally see Esther as a type of Christ, but I think that kind of, it's often called typology. I mean, this sort of early foreshadowing of who Jesus is, it's all over the Old Testament. And I think Esther is definitely one good example of that.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap it up with our time in the Preaching Collective today. We will be back, though. You know what I'm saying?
Like
we
we
will
never
be
left.
back. Like we never left to talk about more about the story of Esther. That, yes, is very shady, to use my rabbi friend's term. But it's mysterious, it's comforting, it's human, and we can see ourselves in Esther a lot, I think, as well. So, and even though God is not mentioned, he is present, he is active, even when we don't directly see it. So, with that, we're going to say, love God, love people. We are out. Peace.